It started on a Monday, an ordinary day with the world going about its usual routines. People headed to work and school, unaware that the week ahead would be anything but typical. The air felt heavy, and the sky hinted at something brewing, but no one could have predicted the scale of what was coming. By midday, the skies unleashed a relentless downpour over Washington State and British Columbia. Rain hammered rooftops and drummed against windows, quickly turning streets slick and gray. The sound of water became a constant backdrop, echoing through neighborhoods and city blocks alike. A massive Pacific storm had parked itself overhead, refusing to budge. What began as steady rain soon escalated into a historic deluge, with weather maps showing a swirling system locked in place. Meteorologists warned of an atmospheric river, an immense plume of moisture drawn straight from the tropics. The ground, already saturated from weeks of autumn rain, couldn't absorb another drop. Water rushed into streams and rivers, swelling them beyond their banks and setting the stage for disaster. Lawns and fields turned to mud, and storm drains struggled to keep up. For 4 days, rain hammered rooftops, flooded streets, and transformed creeks into raging torrents. Neighborhoods watched as water crept higher, inching closer to doorsteps and garages. The relentless downpour blurred the line between land and water. Yards became lakes, and the sound of rain was a constant, unnerving reminder of the growing threat. Children pressed their faces to foggy windows, watching as familiar playgrounds disappeared beneath rising water. The world outside felt transformed, unpredictable, and dangerous. This was an atmospheric river, an airborne current dumping its contents directly onto the region, hour after hour. The storm seemed endless, with thick clouds blotting out the sun and time itself feeling suspended in the gray. Commutes became treacherous, with cars splashing through deep puddles and roads closing one by one. Schools shut their doors, and unease settled over entire communities. Neighbors checked on each other, sharing updates and anxieties as the rain refused to let up. Rainfall totals soared, especially in the mountains, where snowmelt and runoff sent torrents downstream toward the valleys. Rivers rose rapidly, carrying debris and mud, threatening everything in their path. As the storm finally weakened, the danger only grew. Rivers, now swollen with runoff, surged toward populated areas. Emergency workers monitored riverbanks, bracing for the worst as water levels continued to climb. The brief pause in rain was replaced by a new fear: massive, widespread flooding that would test the resilience of everyone in its path. Entire neighborhoods watched helplessly as floodwaters crept into homes and businesses, leaving uncertainty in their wake. The storm had passed, but its consequences were just beginning. Streets were left scarred, homes damaged, and communities faced the daunting task of recovery. The 4-day siege of rain would be remembered for years to come, a reminder of nature's power and the strength required to endure it. The aftermath was chaos. Rivers across Washington raged with a fury not seen in decades. The relentless rain had pushed waterways to their absolute limits, transforming peaceful streams into torrents of destruction. Communities that had grown accustomed to the gentle flow of these rivers now faced a force of nature that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The Skagit River was first to overflow, swallowing farmland and rural roads in muddy water. Fields that once promised a season's harvest disappeared beneath a brown, churning sea. Farmers and residents watched helplessly as their livelihoods were swept away, the landscape changing before their eyes in a matter of hours. Levees strained as debris-laden currents threatened to breach their defenses. Emergency crews rushed to reinforce the barriers, stacking sandbags and monitoring weak points, but the sheer volume of water and debris made their efforts feel almost futile at times. The Puyallup River, swollen by Mount Rainier's runoff, surged dangerously close to homes and businesses. Residents scrambled to move valuables to higher ground, while shop owners did their best to protect storefronts from the encroaching water. Towns like Puyallup and Sumner watched anxiously as water crept up floodwalls. The community came together, neighbors helping neighbors, united by the shared threat and uncertainty of what the next hour might bring. The flooding was immense, affecting valleys, suburbs, and everything in between. Roads became rivers, and entire neighborhoods were cut off from the outside world, forcing emergency responders to use boats to reach those in need. Rivers like the Nooksack, Skagit, and Snohomish all burst their banks, reclaiming land developed over generations. Decades of progress and hard work were erased in a matter of hours. As the water swept through fields, homes, and businesses alike, entire neighborhoods vanished beneath swirling floodwaters. Cars floated, landscapes became unrecognizable. Families were forced to evacuate, leaving behind everything they owned, unsure of what they would return to once the waters receded. Experts called it a locally catastrophic event, with rivers moving at unprecedented speed and force. The scale of destruction was unlike anything most residents had ever witnessed, and the recovery would take months, if not years. Nature's power was on full display, a historic flood that would be remembered for generations. The scars left behind would serve as a reminder of both the vulnerability and resilience of the communities that call Washington home. As rivers surged to historic levels, the landscape transformed almost overnight. What were once familiar banks and fields became unrecognizable, swallowed by relentless, rising water. The roar of the swollen rivers echoed through towns, a constant reminder of the danger that was quickly approaching. In response, officials issued urgent evacuation orders for tens of thousands of residents, their voices amplified by megaphones and emergency broadcasts. The message was clear: leave now, or risk being trapped by the floodwaters. Governor Bob Ferguson's office estimated that as many as 100,000 people might need to flee their homes, a staggering number that underscored the scale of the unfolding disaster. The evacuation orders focused on the most vulnerable areas, floodplains along the Skagit and Puyallup rivers, where the threat of inundation was greatest and the speed of the rising water left little time to act. Emergency alerts blared on phones and radios, while law enforcement officers went door to door, urging neighbors to leave immediately. The sense of urgency was palpable as every minute counted. In towns like Mount Vernon and Burlington, families scrambled to gather what they could: important documents, cherished keepsakes, and enough supplies to last through the uncertainty ahead. Parents carried children through flooded streets, determined to keep them safe. As the evacuation began, roads leading out of the flood zones quickly became clogged with traffic. Long lines of cars snaked through waterlogged streets, headlights cutting through the rain as people tried to escape the rising tide. Shelters opened their doors in schools and community centers, offering a safe haven for those forced to leave everything behind. Volunteers worked tirelessly to provide food, warmth, and comfort to the displaced. For those who hesitated or stayed behind, the risks were immense. The floodwaters were cold and fast-moving, filled with debris, hidden hazards, and the threat of being cut off from help as conditions worsened. First responders issued stark warnings. Soon, even rescue operations would become impossible as the water continued to rise and the current grew stronger. For many, leaving meant saying goodbye to the only home they'd ever known, uncertain if they would ever return. The heartbreak was visible on their faces, but hope remained that one day they could rebuild and start anew. With the crisis escalating, Governor Ferguson declared a statewide emergency. This unlocked state resources and streamlined aid to the hardest-hit areas. The declaration allowed for rapid deployment of supplies and equipment, bypassing red tape. The Washington National Guard was activated, bringing military support to overwhelmed communities. The governor urged residents to heed evacuation orders, emphasizing that lives mattered most. The emergency declaration marked a turning point, mobilizing the full power of the state against the flood. The National Guard's arrival brought hope to communities overwhelmed by water. 300 Guard members joined exhausted first responders, ready for high-water rescues and critical support. Using tactical vehicles, they evacuated trapped residents and delivered emergency supplies. Guard members reinforced levees, worked alongside volunteers, and assessed damage to infrastructure. Their discipline and expertise brought order to chaos, supporting relief efforts around the clock. The Guard's activation showed the seriousness of the crisis and the state's commitment to saving lives. These men and women left their own families to serve their neighbors in crisis. Their courage and skill were vital as they navigated treacherous waters. They were true heroes, providing a lifeline to communities on the brink. The National Weather Service warned that several rivers would crest at or near record levels. The Nooksack, Skagit, and Snohomish rivers surged, threatening towns and erasing familiar landscapes. Levees strained as officials watched river gauges with growing anxiety. Even after the crest, danger lingered. Floodwaters would recede slowly, leaving vast areas submerged. Prolonged flooding meant extensive damage to homes, businesses, and infrastructure. Landslides threatened hilly areas, compounding the crisis. The floodplains, developed over decades, were reclaimed by rivers in hours. This event was a stark reminder of nature's power, temporarily rewriting the maps of western Washington. The deluge paralyzed the region's transportation network, isolating entire communities. Interstate 5 and dozens of state routes were closed, turning roads into extensions of the swollen rivers. Supply chains broke down, commuters were stranded, and emergency services struggled to reach those in need. In British Columbia, all major highways connecting Vancouver to the interior were shut by flooding and landslides. The closures cut off Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, creating a transportation crisis of unprecedented scale. The Port of Vancouver was unable to move goods inland, causing economic shockwaves. Residents found themselves stranded or cut off from essential services. Highways became waterways, a dramatic illustration of the storm's power. The same atmospheric river battered British Columbia, triggering a parallel disaster. A state of emergency was declared in the Fraser Valley, a vital agricultural and transportation hub. Entire communities, like Merritt, were evacuated as rivers overflowed and infrastructure failed. Farmers in Abbotsford raced to save livestock as the Sumas Prairie refilled with water. All major highways out of Vancouver were closed by flooding and landslides, isolating the city. The Nooksack River's floodwaters crossed the border, impacting both countries. The crisis demanded cross-border cooperation as both regions battled a common, relentless storm. Amid destruction, the Pacific Northwest's spirit shone through. Neighbors helped each other evacuate, volunteers set up shelters, and donations poured in. First responders and National Guard members performed daring rescues, but ordinary citizens became heroes too. Farmers used tractors and boats to save people and animals. Others offered rides and supplies. As the rain subsided, attention turned to recovery. Thousands of homes and businesses were damaged or destroyed. The cleanup would be monumental, with economic impacts lasting for years. Yet, resilience prevailed. The region has rebuilt before and will again. For now, the focus is on recovery, rebuilding, and healing, together.